President Trump says these tariffs will help American farmers and ranchers, but farmers and ag economists tell me they're worried, and they think this will not only hurt California farmers, but also California consumers at the grocery store.
Today's actions, we're also standing up for our great farmers and ranchers who are brutalized by nations all over the world.
The silos in Iowa are full, but the ships leave empty. At Rotterdam, inspectors in hazmat suits reject another U.S. soybean container. In Alexandria, dock workers wrinkle their noses at the sour stench of moldy beans. Just 3 years ago, American soybeans were the global gold standard, stamped with trust, shipped with pride. Now, they're being turned away at the world's busiest ports. Chlorpyrifos, Moldavian moisture, contaminants. Each rejection chips away at an empire that once fed nations. Meanwhile, north of the border, Canada is quietly rewriting the rules of the global food game, securing billion-dollar deals and redefining quality. How did the U.S. fall from dominance to doubt, while Canada surged forward with quiet precision? And more urgently, can the damage be undone? There was a time, not long ago, when the words U.S. soybeans meant reliability. From the Great Plains to the Mississippi River, soybeans flowed in seamless rhythm, planted in Illinois, inspected in Missouri, loaded in Louisiana, then shipped to Tokyo, Rotterdam, Shanghai. The system was vast but efficient. Buyers rarely questioned it. American farmers, backed by decades of USDA protocols and global trust, delivered on time, at scale, and at prices the world couldn't resist. During the 2010s, U.S. soybeans dominated 40% of global exports. Nations built entire food systems around them, from tofu in Japan to livestock feed in Egypt. American supply was so entrenched, it felt irreplaceable. Infrastructure, from grain elevators to port terminals, was optimized for mass-scale output. The global trade network, forged through free trade agreements and decades of diplomacy, ensured stability. But stability often breeds complacency. By 2021, warning signs began to flicker. Climate volatility sparked growing inconsistencies in moisture content. Domestic policy shifted away from long-term food security toward short-term price control. Funding cuts reduced third-party testing. Meanwhile, glyphosate debates and rising concern over chemical residues began surfacing in the EU and China. Canada was listening. In October 2024, the Canadian Grain Commission launched a meticulous new program, testing thousands of soybean samples annually, building a traceability database powered by blockchain. It wasn't flashy, but it was systematic. Canadian agronomists studied consumer sentiment across Asia and Europe and responded with a promise. No more generic bulk shipments. Each lot would be trackable, each shipment certified, and critically, the majority were non-GMO, a growing demand among health-conscious and environmentally aware buyers. By early 2025, Canada was already inking deals. While U.S. exports fell, Canada signed long-term contracts with China, Japan, and the EU, totaling over $1.1 billion. What started as a quiet pivot in strategy would soon become a full-blown shift in global soybean power. In the early months of 2025, U.S. agriculture officials were caught off guard. The alarm bell didn't come from Washington. It came from the docks of Rotterdam, where a 20-ton shipment of soybeans was flagged for excessive foreign material. Inspectors found 3.4% impurities, double the EU's threshold. A week later, in Qingdao, China's port authority halted another U.S. container due to chlorpyrifos residue measuring 0.11 parts per million. Then came Alexandria, Egypt. Moisture content exceeded 14.5%. Mold detected, fermentation odor noted. The verdict? Rejection. 3 continents, 3 different reasons, but the conclusion was the same. U.S. soybeans were no longer meeting expectations. Back in Washington, the USDA scrambled. Their initial reaction? Denial. These are isolated incidents, an agency spokesperson said at a February press briefing, but behind closed doors, panic brewed. Internal audits revealed that the U.S. system, still reliant on average sampling and voluntary compliance, was no match for the rising global demand for lot-level traceability and zero-defect standards. Part of the blame, insiders admitted, was political. During the previous administration, cost-cutting measures had gutted third-party inspection programs. Domestic lobbying groups had pushed back against stricter regulations, fearing they would delay shipments or increase expenses for exporters. As a result, oversight weakened. Compliance shifted to trust. But now, that trust was collapsing under scrutiny. Facing mounting rejections and a 14% year-over-year drop in export commitments, the U.S. tried to pivot. In March 2025, the USDA introduced an emergency overhaul, a plan to move from average batch testing to lot-level traceability, incorporating third-party certification. But this system required months, if not years, to scale. Farmers needed new barcoding systems, grain elevators required software upgrades, and existing silos had no method of segregating shipments by genetic trait or pesticide profile. Then came the political reaction. Former President Donald Trump, eyeing a comeback, issued a fiery letter to U.S. soybean buyers abroad, warning of economic retaliation if they abandoned American farmers for Canadian inferior products. The message landed like a threat, but the deals had already been signed. Canada's soybeans were in transit, clean, certified, and fully traceable. By the time the U.S. began adjusting its system, the market had shifted. The trust deficit wasn't just about chemical residues or moisture, it was about confidence in the entire American supply chain. Canada, by contrast, didn't wait to react. It planned to lead. In 2022, when whispers of pesticide residue concerns began to circulate in global ag circles, Canada quietly conducted a review of its soybean inspection protocols. The Canadian Grain Commission, CGC, collaborating with academic partners, began modeling what a next-generation quality system might look like. The result was the Soy Quality Program, launched in October 2024. It was radical in its simplicity. Trace every shipment to its field of origin, verify its genetic profile, and test every lot, not batch, for pesticide, moisture, and protein content. All results were uploaded to a blockchain-accessible database, visible to regulators and buyers alike. No surprises, no excuses, but Canada didn't stop at lab tests. Understanding that buyers, especially in Japan and the EU, wanted assurance beyond paperwork, they began building cold chain infrastructure near key port facilities. New investments flowed into Port of Vancouver and Halifax, refrigerated storage, humidity-controlled silos, and data centers for live monitoring. It wasn't just about avoiding spoilage. It was about demonstrating a level of care that global customers had come to expect from premium food producers. At the policy level, Canada began aggressively courting major soybean buyers. Trade officials organized summits with Chinese ag companies and Japanese food processors. The pitch? Canadian soybeans are not just safe, they're consistent. The variety is non-GMO, the certification is real, and the system is backed by government accountability. In a world of rising food fraud and chemical concerns, Canada offered something rare: predictability. It worked. In January 2025, Canada signed a $600 million export deal with Japan. The following month, the EU inked a $750 million contract focused exclusively on Canadian non-GMO, high-protein soybeans. And in March, China committed to a deal projected between $1.2 and $2 billion over 5 years, marking a historic shift in its sourcing strategy. Canadian farmers responded. Seed companies began phasing in high-protein, climate-resilient soybean varieties. Equipment manufacturers introduced machines designed for varietal segregation. Provinces like Saskatchewan and Manitoba offered tax credits for producers who adopted certified traceability systems. While the U.S. was still issuing warnings and trying to salvage rejected shipments, Canada was closing the loop, building an ecosystem where quality was not just promised, but proven. It wasn't about being better, it was about being prepared. Now, both nations find themselves staring across the same table, but with very different cards in hand. The United States holds capacity, thousands of acres of fertile land, an industrial-scale shipping system, and an agricultural legacy rooted in volume. Canada holds trust, meticulous inspection protocols, buyer confidence, and rising brand equity in global agriculture. But here's the bind. America can't pivot fast enough. The infrastructure it needs, segregated silos, digital traceability, third-party testing networks, can't materialize overnight. The cost is high, the politics are messy, and time is running out. Exporters are nervous, farmers are furious, and partners abroad are looking elsewhere. Canada, meanwhile, must scale without losing precision. The challenge is to meet surging demand while preserving the same rigorous standards that earned trust in the first place. A single contaminated shipment or a lapse in data integrity could undo years of careful positioning. The spotlight is now on them, and success comes with pressure. Both countries face a choice: collaborate to rebuild a unified North American soybean standard, or continue down divergent paths that risk isolation and inefficiency. The fracture is no longer about soybeans. It's about identity: who leads in food transparency, who defines agricultural excellence, and who earns the trust of the global table. In the heart of Saskatchewan, just outside Regina, sits Maple Path Agri, a mid-sized Canadian grain exporter that, until recently, was virtually unknown outside its province. Today, it's at the center of a booming agricultural transformation. In early 2025, Maple Path inked a $72 million supply contract with a Japanese soy food manufacturer, one of many firms lured by Canada's promise of non-GMO traceable soybeans. But success hasn't come cheap. To meet its new obligations, Maple Path had to revamp its entire processing chain. They partnered with a blockchain firm in Montreal to digitize field-level data, hired new QA staff for round-the-clock testing, and invested in cold storage upgrades. We went from batch-level testing to lot-by-lot DNA mapping in under 6 months, said CEO Danielle Leclerc. It was terrifying and expensive. The Canadian government helped, but only so much. Federal grants covered 25% of infrastructure costs, but producers and processors shouldered the rest. For Maple Path, that meant taking out a bridge loan at 8% interest to build an on-site cold chamber and upgrade seed cleaning machinery. Then came logistics. Shipping through Port of Vancouver used to be straightforward, but with new cold chain standards in place, containers needed thermal tracking and humidity seals. Delays became costly. A 2-day holdup due to a software glitch with QR-coded manifests nearly voided an entire shipment bound for Osaka. We're under scrutiny now, Leclerc explained. If there's even a hint of compromise, the buyer walks. Other Canadian exporters faced similar challenges. Skilled labor for QA testing is scarce, rural infrastructure lags, and not every farm is ready to meet global scrutiny. It's not enough to grow soy, said one farmer. You have to prove every single day that your soy is clean, verified, and traceable. But the pressure is matched by payoff. Canada's soybean exports jumped 35% in the first half of 2025, totaling $4.1 billion annually. Provinces are investing in new agri-tech hubs. Small towns like Moose Jaw and Brandon are seeing a resurgence in rural employment. The risk is high, but so is the reward. Yet behind the optimism lies fragility. The system is young. One large-scale failure, whether it be contaminated product, hacked traceability data, or failed delivery, could trigger a cascading loss of trust. For now, Canada is winning, but the cost of maintaining that lead is steep and growing. Meanwhile, in Piatt County, Illinois, farmer John Miller walks through fields of soybean plants he may never harvest for export. No one wants them, he says flatly. I've got 600 acres ready to go, but the buyers, they're gone. Switch to Canada. Miller represents a broader crisis, one hitting the heart of rural America. For decades, soybean exports were his family's backbone. But now, his silos are full, and his bank account is not. Prices have plunged to $10.20 per bushel, the lowest, adjusted for inflation, since 2006. I can't pay off seed debt, fertilizer loans, or the tractor I leased last spring. Facing export rejections and falling confidence, Miller has been offered a painful alternative: sell into the feed-grade market, but that pays just 30 to 40% of what he'd earn from export. I lose 60% of my income. That's not farming. That's bleeding out slowly. He's not alone. Across the Midwest, more farmers are turning to corn, but that too is saturated. Banks are tightening loans, equipment upgrades are on hold, and co-ops are warning of layoffs. When one link breaks, grain handling, shipping, inspection, it ripples outward, says Clara Ung, an agricultural economist at Purdue. This isn't just about soybeans, it's about economic stability. Even downstream, the impact is felt. U.S. food processors relying on consistent soy imports are paying higher premiums for guaranteed clean shipments. Some have begun exploring contracts with Canadian firms, undermining domestic supply chains. In short, America's soybean dominance hasn't just faltered, it's begun to fracture from the inside. And unless systems modernize quickly, the economic cost may outpace the agricultural one. North America now stands at an inflection point. On one side is a legacy system strained by complacency and struggling to catch up. On the other, a nimble rival racing ahead, risking overextension in pursuit of dominance. Both the United States and Canada have tasted the rewards and burdens of global agricultural leadership. But in a world demanding transparency, traceability, and trust, volume alone is no longer enough. Soybeans are just the beginning. If both nations continue down separate paths, one chasing recovery, the other chasing perfection, they may find themselves divided in a market that increasingly rewards integration. Shared standards, cooperative logistics, and a mutual commitment to credibility could redefine North American agriculture. But absent collaboration, isolation looms. In the race to define the future, will North America win together or fail separately, clinging to pride over partnership? Are you American or Canadian? Share your story and perspective in the comments below.